The hallway was too clean, too quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped around your throat and squeezed slowly like it wanted you to notice it. At 12:32 p.m., the wall clock blinked with sterile indifference, casting a digital glow onto the white floor. In room 309, the machines hummed with a cold steadiness that made everything feel worse, like time itself had grown tired of pretending it cared. On the bed, beneath a pink blanket with cartoon stars fading from too many washes, 8-year-old Liana Mwangi lay still. Her skin had lost its sun-kissed tone and turned to something dull and gray, and her curls, once bouncing with life, now stuck to the side of her face like forgotten ribbons. She had not moved, spoken, or opened her eyes in 7 days. One moment she was tying her school shoes at the breakfast table, giggling because her left sock had holes in it, and the next, she collapsed face first onto the floor without a sound. Doctors called it acute cerebral shutdown, a term that sounded clinical enough to sound hopeful, but none of them knew what it really meant. They flew in experts from Johannesburg, Lagos, even Cairo. Scans were done, charts filled, theories debated, but all the while her father sat by her side, unmoving. His name was Kofi Mwangi, a bridge worker and single father with hands built for stone and sweat, not soft hospital sheets. He had built highways across Kenya, lifted concrete pillars with cranes, survived floods, heat waves, and accidents on high scaffolding. But none of that had prepared him for watching his daughter slip through his fingers 1 hour at a time. Nurses whispered behind masks that it was love. Some doctors muttered it was foolishness. Kofi didn't hear any of them. He was too busy singing songs under his breath, songs from when Liana was a baby and the night was long and scary. He told her about the stars again, even though she couldn't hear him, about the moon and how it danced with Venus on Thursdays. But by the 6th night, whispers became firmer. The hospital's director came with an offer. His name was Cedric Okoro, a billionaire tech magnate known more for arrogance than compassion. He was the kind of man who read newspapers only when his name was in them and drank coffee roasted on volcanic soil that cost more than Kofi made in a week. He arrived flanked by a translator, 2 bodyguards, and a camera crew. He didn't knock. He just stepped into room 309 like he owned it, like grief had a price tag. "I've read about your daughter," he said, adjusting his silk scarf. "She's an opportunity." Kofi's jaw twitched. "An opportunity?" Cedric smiled. "A chance to prove what science can do. I have an AI diagnostic tool trained on over 1.3 million neurological data points. We'll run it through VR stimulation, inject biowave triggers, and recalibrate her system. We'll wake her up." Kofi looked at his sleeping daughter. "And what if she's not a system?" Cedric chuckled. "Sentiment clouds logic. She'll be upgraded like software." Kofi stood slowly. "She's not a phone. She's my child." But he let them try. He was tired, and his hope was bleeding slowly into the IV bags. So Cedric brought in the machines, the international team of experts, cables, beeping towers, blinking helmets. They attached diodes to her temples and pumped colors into her dreams. But Liana did not move. Not a twitch, not a blink, not a miracle. Cedric left 2 days later with a shrug and a press release. "We tried everything," he told the cameras. "The human brain is a mystery." Kofi stayed behind. He read The Girl in the Moonlight Path again, Liana's favorite book. He rubbed coconut oil into her hands. He cried only when the lights were out. Then, just after midnight, a knock tapped on the glass. A nurse peeked in, cautious. "Mr. Mwangi," she whispered. "There's a boy outside who says he wants to help." Kofi blinked. "What boy?" She motioned toward the lobby. And there he was. A small barefoot boy no older than 10. His jeans were frayed at the knees, his shirt too big, and his hoodie hung off one shoulder like it didn't belong to him. His feet were covered in red dust, his face smudged, but his eyes, they were still. Not empty, not afraid, just still. Kofi stepped closer. "Are you lost?" The boy looked up. "Are you Liana's father?" Kofi nodded slowly. "Yes." The boy stood. "I can help her." Kofi rubbed his face. "Kid, listen, this isn't a place for games." The boy tilted his head. "It's not a game. She's not lost. She's listening. But she doesn't know if it's safe to come back." Kofi stiffened. "What are you talking about? She needs something the machines don't give." Kofi frowned. "What?" "Your truth, not your strength. The part you don't say out loud." Kofi froze. The boy's voice was too calm, too precise, like someone who had lived 1,000 lives in 10 years. "Who are you?" Kofi asked. The boy didn't answer. "Can I sit with her?" Kofi hesitated. Something in his gut wanted to say no, but his heart, it leaned forward. "All right," he whispered. The boy stepped into room 309. He placed one small hand on Liana's forehead, closed his eyes, and didn't say a word. Then he stepped back. "Now you," he said. "She knows you're here, but she needs to know why." Kofi sat, eyes locked on his daughter. "I wasn't there," he said, voice barely a whisper. "I was supposed to drive you to school, but I left early for work. You tied your shoes alone. I should have seen it. Should have known you were tired. I missed the signs." He clutched her hand. "Please, come back. I'll never miss another second." A beep echoed in the room. The monitor jumped slightly. The nurse gasped. Kofi's eyes widened. "Did you see that?" "I did," the boy said softly. "She's listening." Kofi turned. "What's your name?" The boy paused, hand on the door. "They call me Nuru," he said. "I'll come back tomorrow." And, just like that, he vanished into the hallway. The next morning, the nurse said no boy had been logged in. Security footage showed no child. The staff laughed it off as stress. But Kofi didn't laugh, because Liana's fingers had twitched again. Her heartbeat was different now, not a rhythm of survival, but a rhythm of return. As the day wore on, Kofi didn't leave the room. He wrote on napkins, receipts, anything he could find, trying to remember the lullaby he used to sing. One nurse offered a notebook. Kofi filled the first page with only 3 words: "Sing, even now." When the night came again, Kofi sat by her bed and closed his eyes. His voice cracked as he started, "There's light in the shadows." He forgot the second line, then remembered. "And stars in the rain." His voice trembled. "Hold on, little dreamer. You'll fly once again." And the monitor didn't beep wildly. It didn't spike. It just steadied. Her left hand twitched again. The nurse covered her mouth. "It's the song," she whispered. Kofi didn't reply. He just kept singing, one note at a time. And outside in the corridor, a small piece of paper lay folded on the floor as if it had been dropped. Kofi picked it up later that night. It read, "Sometimes the healing starts before the waking. Keep singing." That night, Kofi didn't sleep. He sat there, humming lullabies into the still air, telling old stories he hadn't spoken in years, not because he believed in miracles, but because a barefoot boy had reminded him what belief sounded like. The morning sun pushed through the blinds with a softness that felt out of place in a hospital built from sharp edges and clinical quiet. Kofi Mwangi hadn't moved all night, his body aching from the stiff plastic chair. But he didn't care. He had spent the last 8 hours whispering lullabies and old stories into the ears of a child who still hadn't opened her eyes but whose fingers had twitched just enough to make the entire world tilt. The nurses rotated shifts, glancing at his daughter's chart like it was written in another language. Liana's brain activity, which had been flatlining into despair, now showed soft hills, gentle curves, like the rhythm of a child dreaming. Kofi didn't want to speak too loud, didn't want to breathe too hard, afraid that whatever magic he had stumbled upon might float away like dust disturbed. He wrote in the notebook again. This time, he wrote every story Liana had asked him to tell over the years, starting with the girl who talked to the rain, then the cloud that wouldn't cry, then the moon and the lonely tree. They weren't published anywhere, just stories he'd made up when she was small and scared and curled against his chest, stories his own mother once told him by candlelight when the power went out in Nairobi and the darkness made the city feel like it had been forgotten. He had stopped telling those stories after the accident that took his wife. He had shut the door to that part of himself like it was a room that no longer belonged to the house. But last night, when Nuru appeared, it was like someone unlocked that door from the inside. At 11:04 a.m., the door creaked open again. Kofi turned instantly, his heart leaping. There he was, barefoot, hoodie the same, eyes quiet and deep. "You came back," Kofi said, standing. Nuru nodded. "I said I would." The boy stepped into the room, looking at Liana as if he'd known her before she was born. "She's closer today," he murmured. "Closer?" Kofi echoed. Nuru touched her wrist gently. "She heard your voice. It lit a path, but now she needs something more." Kofi frowned. "What else?" Nuru didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, looked out at the clouds hanging like tired thoughts. "She needs the song, the one you used to sing when you were still whole." Kofi's throat tightened. "I sang last night." "No," Nuru said, turning to him. "You sang a memory. She needs the song that was born before the silence, the one you haven't dared to touch since fire took your world." Kofi stumbled back, eyes wide. He hadn't told anyone about the fire. Not the nurses, not the doctors. Only 2 people had ever known about it. His wife and Liana. That night, the one where the kitchen stove erupted in flame, where smoke crawled up the walls like angry fingers, where he dragged Liana and her mother out just before the roof collapsed. His wife had died days later, from injuries no one could fix. And after that, the lullabies stopped. The guitar he used to strum was put in a box, and the voice that once brought joy became something he buried under brick and cement. "I can't sing that," Kofi whispered, trembling. "It hurts." Nuru nodded. "So did she when she called for you in the dark." Kofi sank into the chair, holding his face. "I'm not that man anymore." "But she's still that girl," Nuru said. "And she remembers." He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small paper crane, folded neatly. He placed it on Liana's chest. "She dreamed of this last night." Kofi's hands shook as he touched the crane. He had taught Liana to fold them when she was 5, after she had a fever and couldn't sleep. It was their secret magic, their paper hope. He hadn't made one in years. Nuru stepped back. Sing the song, not for her ears, but for her soul. And with that, the boy walked out again. Kofi didn't follow. He couldn't. His body was frozen in the chair, his memories clawing at the edges of his mind like ghosts not ready to leave. But that night, when the nurses dimmed the lights and the machines beeped softly in the background, he took the notebook into his hands, stared at the empty page, and hummed the first note. It was rough, broken, like the crack in a foundation right before the whole house collapses. But it was something. He forced his voice to move, to remember, to reach into the past and drag out the melody his wife used to hum while brushing Leanna's hair. There's light in the shadows, and stars in the rain. His eyes filled with tears. Hold on, little dreamer. You'll fly once again. And somewhere in that hospital room, the air shifted. Not the kind you see, but the kind you feel, like warmth curling around your spine. Liana's fingers twitched again. Her heartbeat climbed one notch. The nurse on duty gasped and called for the attending physician. Kofi didn't stop singing. The next morning, Dr. Okech, the lead neurologist, stared at the chart like it was a riddle. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "The readings are inconsistent with coma states." The nurse nodded. "She's responding to sound." "What kind of sound?" the doctor asked. Kofi spoke up from the corner. "Songs? Stories?" "That's not scientific," she said. "No," Kofi replied, "but it's real." Later that day, the press caught wind of Leanna's improvement. Cedric Okoro returned, not with machines this time, but with microphones. "We're proud to see progress," he said to the cameras, "though we'll continue investigating the medical basis." Kofi didn't correct him. He didn't need the world's approval. He only needed his daughter's hand, which now twitched every time he sang the second verse. That afternoon, another nurse found a folded paper tucked into the oxygen tank cabinet. No one knew how it got there. No cameras had seen anyone enter. It read, "Her name is stronger than silence. Say it like a prayer." So Kofi did. Every hour he whispered, "Liana, my bright star." The girl who hadn't opened her eyes in over a week started to murmur in her sleep. Not words, but sound. The sound of returning. That night, Kofi saw Nuru again. He was sitting on the windowsill of the hallway, legs swinging, looking out at the sky. "I've been waiting," the boy said. "She needed your song, and now—" "Now what?" Kofi asked. "Now she needs the world to know it too." Kofi blinked. "What do you mean?" "Tell the stories. All of them. Not just to her, but to everyone who's forgotten what healing sounds like." Kofi thought about it. The notebook was almost full. He had scribbled tales and songs, some messy, some half-remembered, all of them raw. "You think anyone wants to hear?" Nuru smiled. "More than you know." Kofi looked back at the room where his daughter now stirred in sleep. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why help us?" Nuru stood. "Because I was once the one lying in bed, and no one came. No voice sang me home, no hand reached through the dark. So now, when I can, I do." Kofi felt his knees weaken. "You're not just a boy, are you?" Nuru said nothing. He walked past him, bare feet padding against the cold tile. "Will I see you again?" Kofi asked. The boy turned slightly. "If she needs me, yes, but I think now she has you." Then he disappeared again. No one saw him leave. No door opened. He was just gone. But Kofi didn't chase him. He sat by his daughter's side, opened the notebook to a new page and began to write again. Kofi Mwangi no longer measured time by days or hours, but by the tiny miracles that came in the shape of twitching fingers, half-muttered breaths, or the barely there flicker beneath Liana's eyelids. The machines still beeped, but now with rhythm, like they, too, were listening for something beyond medical logic. The ICU nurses had stopped whispering behind clipboards. They now stood by the door longer than necessary, not because anything was wrong, but because something extraordinary was happening and none of them wanted to miss it. Kofi hadn't left the hospital in over a week. He slept in the same chair, sang the same lullaby each night, and wrote until the ink stained his fingers. The notebook had only a few pages left now, filled with stories Liana used to love and new ones born out of pain and hope braided together. He told her about the rivers that ran backwards during eclipses, about mountains that sang when no one was watching, about children who whispered to stars until they blinked in Morse code. These weren't bedtime tales anymore. They were lifelines. On the 9th night since Nuru first appeared, Kofi did something he hadn't done in years. He recorded himself. With the help of a young intern named Grace, who had overheard him singing one night, he sat in a small room beside the ICU and read from his notebook. His voice was raw, his guitar out of tune, his hands clumsy. But when he played "There's Light in the Shadows," Grace didn't look at her clipboard. She cried. The next day, she uploaded the audio to a private link. By morning, it had been shared among the staff, then the nurses' WhatsApp groups, and by that evening, someone had posted it online. The video was just a still image of a girl's hand resting on a pink blanket, with the caption, "She's coming back, one story at a time." Kofi didn't know any of this until a nurse showed him her phone and said, "You're viral, Mr. Mwangi." He didn't know what that meant at first until he saw the number below the post, 217,000 views. He stared at it, blinking slowly. "Why would anyone watch this?" he asked. "Because it's real," she said, "and people are starving for something real." Kofi didn't know how to feel. He hadn't recorded those songs for the world. He had done it for one girl lying still under a blanket of silence. But maybe, just maybe, there were others like her, others waiting for a voice in the dark. Later that night, he saw Nuru again. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the edge of the hospital's rooftop, his bare feet dangling over the side. The wind played with the hem of his hoodie like it remembered him from somewhere. Kofi approached slowly. "You always find the places no one checks." Nuru looked up, his face calm as always. "That's where the echoes live," he replied. "You know, they've started sharing your stories," Kofi said. Nuru nodded. It was time. "But why now?" Kofi asked. "Why Liana? Why me?" Nuru looked out at the city, the soft glow of streetlights stretching like veins. "Because the world doesn't need more experts. It needs more fathers who remember how to sing." Kofi sat beside him. "You speak like someone older than you look." "Age isn't always in years," Nuru said. "Sometimes it's in how many nights you've waited without anyone coming." There was silence between them for a while, broken only by the occasional siren in the distance. Then Nuru said, "She's almost ready." Kofi turned sharply. "To wake up?" "To choose," Nuru said. "She's not just returning because of your voice. She's returning because she believes the world might still be worth coming back to." "Is it?" Kofi asked. "That's up to you," Nuru replied. He stood, brushed imaginary dust off his pants, and looked Kofi in the eye. "Make something permanent. Something that outlives her coma. A place, a song, a name, so that others can find their way back too. Kofi didn't answer, but he knew what the boy meant, not just healing for Liana, but healing for others like her. Healing for him. The next morning, he made a decision. He sold his truck. He called in the last favor from an old friend in construction. He asked Grace if she knew anyone who painted murals. Within 48 hours, the idea was no longer just a whisper in a notebook. It had a name, Voices at Dawn, a space for children recovering from illness, grief, or trauma. Music, stories, colors, and quiet corners where no one rushed you to be okay. Kofi didn't have a building yet, but he had blueprints in his heart and songs in his pocket. The hospital offered him a small, disused classroom behind the pediatric wing to start with. He hung up a sign, hand-painted by Grace, where silence ends, healing begins. Liana hadn't opened her eyes yet, but her breathing had changed. Her pulse now rose slightly every time he mentioned the center, as if, even in dreams, she understood. That weekend, a journalist reached out. A soft-spoken woman named Miriam who had seen the video and driven 5 hours just to ask one question. Do you really believe it was a barefoot boy who started all this? Kofi didn't flinch. I don't just believe it, he said. I saw him, twice. What's his name? She asked. Nuru, Kofi said. Like light? Exactly like light. Miriam wrote a full column titled, The Boy They Can't Catch on Camera. It went viral in under a day. Millions read it. Some scoffed, some sent hate, but some wept. In inboxes and voicemails and handwritten letters, people started sending their own stories. My sister is in a coma. My son stopped speaking. My mother forgot my name. They all ended the same way. If you see the boy, ask him to visit us too. One letter arrived from a prison in Eldoret, another from a cancer ward in Kisumu. One woman wrote, I don't have a child in a hospital, but I haven't sung in 15 years. I did last night. Thank you. Kofi read each one. Then he sat beside Liana and said, See, baby? Your story is reaching people I've never even met. That night, as he sang again, Liana's lips moved, just slightly. The nurse gasped. Kofi dropped the notebook. Did you see that? She said something, the nurse whispered. They leaned in. Liana's voice was barely air, but the word was clear. Daddy. Kofi fell apart, not in a loud, broken kind of way, but like something soft inside him had collapsed into grateful ruin. He held her hand, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, I'm here, baby. I never left. Where's the boy? She asked. Kofi froze. You saw him? She blinked slowly. He said he was the echo that found me, when I was floating, when I couldn't see. He said, Your daddy's waiting on the other side of the dark. So I followed the light. Kofi's heart cracked wide open. He held my hand, Liana whispered. He said his name was Nuru. He didn't need wings, just faith. The following morning, doctors surrounded her chart like it was a sacred artifact. None of it made sense. No medication had been administered in 3 days. No surgical intervention. Yet Liana Mwangi was speaking, blinking, even smiling faintly. We'll call it spontaneous neural reintegration, Dr. Okech said. A rare but possible response. Call it whatever you like, Kofi replied, but I know what brought her back. And in the corner of the window, someone had taped a note in blue pen. Sometimes belief rewrites science. Let her story do the same. The days that followed blurred into a soft haze of whispered gratitude and quiet awe. Liana Mwangi was awake. Not fully, not yet walking or reading or dancing like she once had, but awake. Her eyes tracked the room, her fingers curled around her father's hand, and her voice, though small and raspy, carried the unmistakable tone of presence. The staff moved gently around room 309 now, as if not to startle a miracle. Some prayed silently when they passed by, some touched the doorknob like it was a relic, and one nurse, the same one who first brought Nuru to Kofi's attention, left a fresh paper crane on the windowsill every morning. Kofi stayed close. He spoke to her as though no time had passed, reminding her of the names of the stars, the stories of the rivers, and the forgotten endings of her favorite fairy tales. He read to her not just from the notebook, now worn and creased, but from the letters people had sent. Letters from parents who had begun to sing again, from children who started speaking after months of silence, from strangers who said they no longer felt so alone at night. And always, always, there was the same question whispered beneath their words. Is Nuru real? Kofi didn't answer that question anymore, not because he didn't believe, but because belief wasn't something he could hand over like proof. It had to rise in someone the way song rises in a throat without warning. It had to grow like warmth on cold hands. He knew Nuru was real because his daughter was breathing proof. But more than that, Kofi had changed. He had become someone he hadn't been in years. A man who sang without shame, who cried without apology, who built something new from the ruins of what was lost. The voices at Dawn Center had moved out of the hospital storage room into a rented shop space across town. Volunteers came from nearby churches, community groups, even a few teenagers who painted stories across the walls with wild, joyful strokes. The first mural was simple. A barefoot boy with dust on his face standing at the edge of a hospital hallway reaching toward a girl in a bed. Above them were the words, "He didn't have wings. He had faith." On the 3-month anniversary of Liana's waking, Kofi recorded their first official story for the internet. Liana sat beside him in her purple rain boots even though it hadn't rained in weeks. "Just in case," she said. "Nuru said the best surprises happen when you're ready for them." Kofi laughed, a real laugh, the kind that cracked open the chest and let out light. They called the channel Isaiah's Echo. Liana had insisted on the name. "He said he was just an echo," she told her father one night, "but it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard." The first video reached 1 million views in less than a week. People wrote from hospital beds, prison cells, nursing homes, shelters, lonely dorm rooms. They wrote not to ask questions, but to share truths. "I thought I was lost," they wrote, "but maybe I'm just not finished yet." Liana began therapy soon after. Her steps were unsteady, her speech sometimes stuttered. But she laughed more often now. She insisted on drawing a new picture every day for the kids at the center. One day she drew a little girl standing on the top of a star, shouting into a megaphone made of clouds. "That's me," she said, "singing until someone lonely hears it." Kofi's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't taught her that language. Nuru had. Late one evening, as the sun dipped behind the Nairobi skyline, Kofi and Liana took a walk through their old neighborhood. It was a quiet place, full of cracked sidewalks and mango trees that stretched toward power lines. They passed the corner store where Kofi once bought Liana her first drawing book, the rusty swing set where she had fallen and refused to cry. And then they saw him. Not Nuru, but someone else. An old man sitting beneath a broken street lamp, playing a harmonica. A cardboard sign rested by his feet. On it were 5 words written in crooked blue pen. "You're not lost, just unfinished." Liana stopped walking. Her hand tightened around Kofi's. "Daddy," she whispered. "Look." Kofi stepped closer. "Sir, where did you hear that phrase?" The man looked up, his beard gray and wild, his eyes cloudy but kind. "Heard it from a boy," he said, "years ago. Said he was just passing through, said he carried truth in his pockets and stories in his bones. Played music with me one night under the stars, then vanished before sunrise." "Was his name Nuru?" Liana asked. The man's eyes sparkled. "Now that you mention it, yes, that was what he said." That night, Liana couldn't sleep. She stood by her bedroom window, staring up at the moon like it owed her something. Kofi walked in, wrapped her blanket around her shoulders, and sat beside her. "What's on your mind, baby?" "I was thinking," she said, hugging her stuffed giraffe, "what if there's another little girl somewhere, like me? What if she's scared? What if she's floating in the dark and no one's singing?" Kofi swallowed the lump in his throat. "Then I hope someone is nearby, telling stories, singing quietly." She nodded solemnly. "We should teach the world to sing." He smiled. "You want to do that?" "Yes," she said, "like you taught me. But bigger, everywhere, on rooftops, on the internet, in whispers and lullabies and dances with no music." Kofi kissed her forehead. "Then we will." And they did. They recorded songs from the notebook, stories of healing, grief, and finding light again. They posted weekly videos with messages like, "To the one who thinks no one sees you, I do." And, "For the kid in the ICU right now, I've been there. Keep listening." In 4 months, their subscriber count passed 2 million. The wall behind the storytelling bench at Voices at Dawn became covered in Polaroids sent by children across Africa and beyond. Each photo came with a sentence: "This is my voice," or "This is the first time I smiled since." And always in the corners, sometimes hidden, sometimes proudly written in bold, "Thank you, Nuru." One day, as they wrapped filming a new story, Liana looked past the camera and whispered, "He's here." Kofi turned. At the back of the small audience sat a boy, barefoot, hoodie frayed, dirt smudged along his jaw, but his eyes, those eyes, were galaxies. Kofi blinked, stood up, stepped forward. But by the time he reached the seat, it was empty. No door had opened. No one had seen him come or go, just as always. But this time, Kofi didn't chase. He just stood there, full, overflowing with everything that couldn't be named. That night, Liana sang on the small center stage. The same song that had brought her back. Her voice was still soft, but it didn't tremble. It carried. Across the room, across the street, across a world that had nearly forgotten how to believe. When she finished, no one clapped, no one moved. There was only stillness, and in that stillness, something sacred breathed. Miracles aren't always thunder and lightning. Sometimes they are dirt under your nails or a voice at bedtime. Sometimes they are the simple act of sitting beside someone and refusing to let them go. Sometimes they are a boy with no shoes who laughs like sunlight and smells like bread, who tells you that you're not broken, only unfinished. And sometimes they're the echo of your own voice, finding its way back to you at last.